It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. I would just like to read an introduction to Fawzia before her reading begins. Fawzia Muradali Kane was born in San Fernando, Trinidad and Tobago, at the start of the country's transition from colonial rule to independence. She moved to the UK after receiving a scholarship to study architecture and has since become not only an architect of buildings, but also a master builder of worlds through her poetry. Her first collection, Tanti, Jobless, was shortlisted for the 2011 Booker's Prize for Caribbean Literature. Fawzia poetry has been published in journals including Agenda, Brittle Star, Poetry Review, Poetry London, and Wales. Her pamphlet, House of the Dead, was published by Themis in 2014. We are here tonight to hear Fawzia read from her second collection, Guaracara, a powerful volume that traces her Indo-Caribbean legacy while exploring the history of the sugarcane industry and her experience growing up in an oil refinery town. These poems tackled hard subjects of colonial exploitation, environmental destruction, the enduring cycle of violence against life, and the impact industries had on the land and sea. The final sequence, Ancestral Coda, links oral tradition with family legacy, using lived experience as a form of architectural blueprint. The poems are emotionally layered, possessing a breathless quality. They are sometimes conversational, sometimes confrontational, always urgent, and haunting in their impact, showcasing how the past bleed into the present. This collection is not only an amalgamation of memory and stark truths, it is also a call to action and resistance. It is an ecological lament, a message transmitted that needs our attention now. Fawzia, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Christine. That's an amazing introduction. I'm really embarrassed. I'm blushing here with that. Sorry, we're both having slight computer issues with our videos, but I hope you could all see us and hear us. Christine? Right. So I will start my reading now. The first one is, and I have to commend the in-house graphics designer, Andrew Latimer, for this cover design, which is, anybody who from the Caribbean who could recognize the outline of three, well, we say kobus, it's actually vultures for the others, kobu, drying their wings after a wet day on the way to Moruga on a lightning-struck tree that we saw. Okay, so the first poem, it's actually I was diagnosed with early onset cataracts in one of my eyes, which is affecting my color rendition, which will be fixed quite soon because it's a simple operation, I've been told. But people in my family have been, my grandfather, for instance, my blog will be put up next week on Carcanet's website, which talks about my grandfather losing his eyesight because of diabetes, though not cataract. But it's a fear we have on what happens if we are progressively losing this precious sense of ours. How do we then cope? How do we then communicate with ourselves on what we have in front of us? I am losing my eyesight, and the street grime and coughs of muffler smoke begin to blossom into a blast of potted anthuriums, while parakeets strobe their flash wings and chitter on wires above. If a thing does not move, is it still alive? This rainy season plays me, makes me huddle under its thump beat on a galvanized tin porch roof, the tinkle of someone's piano lessons. Corbeau hover while notes slide down Monrepo pavements, and I am learning a different language. How to grasp new signals, fading sunlight that sculpts wall against shadow, a hissing cat gliding ahead as guide, or the hairs on my skin rising at the sound of footsteps on stairs and the slowness of a curtain being drawn. Thank you. The next one, I'll just put it up in a minute. There we go. Now this form, I call it the after hours. It's Inua Elams has invented this, and you take an existing poem, and I think when you have the time, have a look at Martin Carter's poem, This is a Dark Time, My Love, the Guyanese poet. And basically, Inua's form is you take the whole poem, the original poem, you keep the last word of each one, and you fit a new poem with this. What I've done is the first and the last word and another word in the middle of the same, in the line of each of that original poem. It resonates because there is a reflection of the first poem, but you end up with something new, and it's something worth testing out yourself also. This poem was written before COVID, so the masks referring to there are actually the masks that we have with Carnival, and Venetian Carnival all over the world, where usually the top half of your face is covered. Although after 2020, a mask seemed to be synonymous and hiding yourself within the lower half. So that's quite an interesting thing that we need to think about also. So Carnival of small creatures. This is the time of masks, little one. All around the street, the naked crawl about their troughs of glitter dust until skins reflect the sky. Red lips of clowns are painted in pretend sorrow. This is the season of masks, little one. It is the bacchanalian dance, half masked with feral tears. It is the festival of black oil, igniting fires of misery. Everywhere revelers' debts rise, may they never grow anxious. Who'll pay to play the devil's mask this time? Whose body will lie among the razor grass? It is the scent of death, little one, that silent invader watching our words and infecting our dream. By the way, razor grass is a type of grass. It's like a very tall lawn grass that can cut the skin like paper when you walk in it. No, we won't read this one, Jasmine. You'll read the next one, thank you. Namesake. My father's youngest brother is called Farouk, his dearest youngest brother. And for some reason, my father was the oldest, and he called his first three daughters after the daughters of King Farouk, Farial, Fadia, Fawzia, not realizing that 10 years later he'll have another daughter. I don't know if she's here right now. I think she's abroad. And that's Nissa. So I was named after this particular woman who had a very tragic life, didn't have much agency in her life until she was brought back after a very disastrous political marriage from Iran. Namesake, in memory of Fawzia of Egypt, or Fawzia. I am not the daughter of a king or even the sister of one. I was not given as a contract between countries to add stature to bandits. I know the grief of homesickness. My uncle loved me as yours did when he saved your whisper of a body and took you home. You bartered with your daughter's life. I have nothing for such an exchange. You discovered that to learn to love is to live. I had that too. When your sisters fled, You chose to stay with your new love, became a stranger in your own land. There are too many dangers if we remain ourselves. And if my love also dies before I grow old, where will I walk? Will all we have built fade into pictures where we stand sad-faced and silent? Beyond the decay of shrouds and caskets lies the grace of caged lives. Oh, may our passing be quick, our bodies washed by women who cry, the courtyard swept before pallbearers jostle, the muezzin hushed among all emptiness that remains. Let these be deaths that give light to wander. Now, the Gulf of Paria is, for those who don't know, it's the little gulf that separates Trinidad from the mainland of Venezuela. There used to be a quite lucrative whaling industry there up in until the whales were hunted out, concurrent with the plantations, the enslavement. It's a part of history that we have forgotten about in the Caribbean. It was also quite interesting that it was free people were involved, probably because it was so risky and on the boats, on the ships. And I think Moby Dick gives a really good example of the way the hierarchy on the society and the little hierarchy that were based on skill, not ethnicity, not background. Concurrent to that, we have now where this is drawing parallels with the Venezuelan refugees who are coming to Trinidad. A few hundreds a week still happens, and this was written a few months after when I was in the Cropper residency in Trinidad in 2019, a couple of months earlier. A boat carrying refugees had capsized. I think in February this year it has happened again. Right. There used to be whales here a century and a half ago, finned, pilot, humpback mothers who hugged the coasts with their calves. Whaling stations lined the bocas, factories of death that boiled, skimmed, and poured gold oil into barrels, while inland, the plantations whipped and boiled their own heat to sweetness. But the whales were hunted until there were only dolphins left, with their inedible guile, too playful and small for serious killing. Our barrels hold a different oil now, black, thick, indelible on the water. The boats still patrol these waters, hoping to fish more than fish. Night searchlights trained to skim the gaps between breakers, while mothers hold their young up to blow, to catch the air against the push of waves. This poem is it's not flash fiction, it's true. It tells also how memory works. Eric was my pet. He was given to as a baby to my sister Fawzia by one of her classmates. He had one ear, as you can see, hence the name Eric. That's Eric. Yes, of course, that's how we pronounce Eric. My memory is Eric was cooked. Well, as you'll see, how Eric died, but Fawzia and my siblings are saying it's actually another pet rabbit we had who was put in the pot, so to speak. It could be both, but I remember that he did not survive anyway, and what happened with guinea pig, I learned a lesson also about loving and the hurt and grief and bereavement, how dangerous that could be. Eric, by the way, I have to be around some Trinese because I need my Trini Creole thing, and forgive me, Trinese, if you hear me reading this with an RP accent. His mother chew his ear off. His siblings put him away. So my father friend bring him home in a shoebox. We put him with the guinea pig. The hutch was in the yard under the rose mango tree where yardfowl stroll past the stinky duck pond. I feed him hibiscus and roses. Eric thrive. But when we come back after holidays in the Mayaro house, sand still rubbing between my toes, we house sitter uncle say, all your rabbit run away. And my father grumble, what? Run to stew pot? Eh? Uncle stay quiet. Guinea pig huddle in the far corner of the hutch, away from the light, refused to come out for my handful of petals, refused to eat anything. He fur mat up, and one morning before school, I find him curl up on his side, open mouth and stiff. I know from them TV shows that a kiss could make a baby. Eric and guinea pig share food, then quarrel, then play, then fall asleep in a tight snuggle over and over. When Pappy put the little body in the shoebox and bury it behind the pond, I see that a boy rabbit and a boy guinea pig could love enough, and without each other, even flowers have no meaning. I have to say also two things. Julia Bird, Julia, if you're there, had explained to me that guinea pigs are very social and you need to have more than one. And this proved why. This is the first time as a child, first time ever I saw an animal making a choice to commit suicide, which is what he did. He just would not, it was, second time was the turkey chick who drowned, but that's another story. That's another story. Yes. Oh, also regarding the Eric poem, that came second last year in the National Poetry Competition, and Imogen Wade, who came first, and I got some flack in one of the papers, I won't say which, the Telegraph, about what we were writing weren't poems, but the prose poem obviously different from a piece of prose or flash fiction, also because soundscape and the way the images flash in front of your eyes without necessarily a straight narrative, although that one had, is so important. So when Pappy put the body in a shoebox, when Pappy put the body in a shoebox and buried it behind the pond, you could hear it there. It's conscious. It wasn't something that we just slapped on and called it a poem. So there you go. This is from the central portion called Let Us Mourn the Death of King Sugar, which is an overview of the sugar industry and its impact on the Trinidad and Tobago landscape, taking in enslavement, taking in indentureship, taking in also here with this particular poem, the way women were treated, enslaved women, a subset of subset. It's almost an obscene version of the Nash's one flea has, a smaller flea on his back, and so on, ad infinitum. One evil in this case has another evil, contains another evil, and contains another evil, which is how the enslaved women were treated in particular. Hilary Beckel's book is a good example, which is difficult reading. I don't know how we all, whatever our backgrounds, when the true nature of enslavement, we know the surface and it's horrific enough, comes out of what happened on those plantations, we will probably need some governmental appointed psychological counseling for the trauma to be dealt with. This is Your Daughters of the Fields Meet. By the way, each title conforms with a particular station on the Stations of the Cross as a hook. to catalogue the journey of conception down to extinction, to condemnation and extinction. So your daughters of the fields meet. It's written also in Creole, as you could see. Nothing go ever change for we. We have it hard now and forever. Sunrise to sunset, spell after spell, breaking we backs half a night in a house full up, line up with coppers, full up with fancy word tasks, clarify, temper, skim. But for we, boil means boil. We feed and clean your animals, food cook and lay out for you, your linen wash until the lie burn skin from we hands. You take we body whenever you fancy, like meat to throw away when spoiled, something to sell or buy. So watch now, we dip we finger in salt water and touch it to the corners of we eyes while we listen to we own man. When he look outside to point finger to say, all you're obscene, because you use skin color to discriminate and exploit a mere physical difference, I tell you. And then with the same breath, he turned to his wife or child and say, shut up, do what I say or I go beat the shit out of you. There's another one from this sequence. We see your nakedness, which is towards the end of the stations. And it's also trying to study about what really what motivates us, unfortunately, or what should not motivate us, but actually does, which is fear, which is underlying most of the laws that we have of control. We see your nakedness. Tell them how this does work, nah? Show how is the same difference, because nothing really changed for us. Nothing really changed so much, except nowadays is metal put to work instead of flesh, instead of cutlass, is combined harvester, behemoth, the Demerara poet call it, and we papa, the big for so long blades that slice when they twist and turn, nasty looking. But the method is always the same, cut close to earth, tear skin and trim to bone to bind up every living thing with ropes of fear. After all, ain't that is what all rules, all laws and power to control does come from? Say it again. What you is afraid of does drive your life on like bullock in front of cart. And Behemoth, the Demerara poet, is actually a reference to Fred Degas' poem, I think, called Behemoth, talking about combined harvesters and the change in the sugar industry also. And Oui Papa is French Creole because of our strange history of having French planters, even though we never were a French colony. And I do not know how to explain why Trinidadians have the affinity, the Welsh. I've been asked a Welsh accent. Maybe somebody else could explain that to me. Thank you. The last poem is really a grumpy response to having to fill in the checklists about ethnicities in the UK. It seems whoever did it doesn't really understand the colonial aspects of, the effects in the rest of the ex-colonies on what ethnicity is, and that the Caribbean is far more mixed. So there's not a box for me to take apart from other. Other. Okay, this is a long breath poem. Oh, it's also, I have to say, my sister, I can't see if Nissa's on the thing, but we had the DNA test done, and as always, they are surprises. So there's the usual Northern India, Uttar Pradesh, Peshawar, which we know from family oral histories that we're from. There was also a touch of Micronesia. I don't know, like New Zealand distance. I don't know, they must have traveled, but also surprisingly, a higher than expected amount of Chinese DNA, which you could probably see in my aunt Jenny, who might be listening if she is, say so, and my sister Nissa herself. So I guess when the genes come out, they come out quite strongly. So that explains Xinjiang. It's the northwestern area of China. We've come from, our ancestors. My pen tracks the desire paths of Xinjiang, traces the foothills of the Himalayas, walks 200 miles along a railway line of empire to Kolkata, sails over Kalapani, gives birth in a quarantine ward on Nelson Island, cuts cane for decades, abandons its children, sacrifices for its children, stares Dolly the horse in a hackney cab around 1920s San Fernando, makes black cake at Christmas, makes crab callaloo and sada roti, makes yam and fried plantain, works 40 years in the oil refinery, breathes in sulfur dioxide-laden air until street children choke while they play, drives the family to a beach house, watches as oil rigs make a permanent dawn along the night sea horizon, grows orchids, sits for 15 years in a wheelchair, waits every morning for hummingbirds in the garden. My pen writes for 7 generations in a country whose keyboards now type, "This is not your time, it is ours." My pen lifts and drips. The ink blots, begins to bleed into other lines. Nothing can be read as the black ink splits and spreads into its chromatogram of component colors. This book is overused. The spine is breaking. The paper was made the old way. Now the edges of its pages tear up. Is it too fragile to touch? My pen hesitates, wants to pretend it understands, pretend it knows where and when to place its mark. Thank you. Oh, the last bit, I will now show a film poem called Guaracara that was made, it's just 3 minutes long. It was made very quickly when PN Review had their 25th anniversary, I think. The music is by Martin A. Parker, who I think is with us today as Piontech. But his music has a great affinity with my work, and I've been making. So I'm just trying to do 10 things at the same time. I've been trying to work on film poems since then. I do apologize for the quality of the film. In a way, it's deliberately low resolution because there are a couple of people in there, and for license reasons, hello, Martin, I don't want to really show who it is, but there's somebody walking with a big machete in the street, as you do in that part of Trinidad. And by the way, it's Baroque Paul, modern day Baroque Paul, pretending to be Marabella 50 years ago. I will now share the screen, and I hope you like it. There we go. There will just be a few minutes while I just have a... Oh, sorry, it's not... There we go. Just before the polio epidemic closed the islands down in 71 and 72, my uncle gave me a Moroccoy. At least it was alive. The last time he went hunting in the rainforest, he came back with a squirrel's tail, and he couldn't understand why I was so upset. Guaracara River was a black thing, iridescent, slow-moving, sticky with waste from the refinery as it poured its pollution into the Gulf of Paria. The banks were slick with oil. The trees were stick-thin, stained outlines of a cartoon hell. Nothing could grow there. There used to be a railway line snaking behind these back streets of Marabella. It ran a few hundred yards to the north of our house, past the empty plots stretching under an ancient salmon tree and over a Bailey bridge spanning the river. I remember the freight trains trundling past with wagons heavy with fresh-cut cane stalks. A sickly molasses scent wafted well after they passed. My brother said once a boy tried to grab a cane stalk while the train was moving and had his arm pulled off. We would hear the adults whispering about polio in the news. Someone said a whole family in the countryside got sick after eating one of their pigs on the farm. Another said it started near the sea and was traveling to the towns. Traveling, our word for taking taxis. Flag them down with a pointing finger, climb onto the seat, join the other passengers. The disease became a live thing. It expanded and billowed dark like the refinery flambeau, moved with a will of its own. We queued up for the vaccination, dosed with a sugar cube on a plastic spoon. Pappy was silent on the way home. I put Mr. Moroccoy out on the lawn and went inside for ice cream. When I returned, it had disappeared. We searched everywhere, even the guppy-filled drains that lined the road outside. I cried for days. I remember when the river caught fire. The water was already thickened with oil sludge. Someone lit their rubbish and the wind threw sparks onto the water's surface. We stood on our street a half-mile away and watched the bonfire's flames grow taller than the houses. It burnt through the night despite the drizzle. The glow moved slowly, followed the river's slackened flow to the sea, catching the crude-covered trees along the banks to bring death to the already dead. Thank you, Martin, for for allowing us to have the music with that. And apologies again. It's basically a rough cut. There's a few jumps in the sound, but it's part of the main poem in the book.
Thank you so much for sharing that video with us, Fawzia. I like the line that says to bring death to the already dead. Such a sort of vivid picture. Makes me wonder what is the poem trying to say when it says to bring death to the already dead? Can you speak a little bit more about that?
When I write, I try to write about what is in front of me as on one level, exactly that. So Guaracara River in that memory was basically just the entire river covered with oil and effluent, the side of it. It was literally iridescent. I think those in the chat who were there at that time would remember that. The trees were there. The trees were full grown, but again, covered in that effluent. Nothing, it's exactly that. Nothing could grow there. And somebody was burning rubbish at the side. I won't say who, for, because they're quite famous artists now, family. Some paper or something just blew onto the water's surface. Right? And it started a fire. The water burnt, was burning. So I think there's an overlaying on the kind of death, because after two things, COVID, when the refinery couldn't work, when I checked on Google Mail, Google Earth, and I just saw the entire length of the river was green. And also the refinery was shut down quite suddenly. And thank you, Sylvester. I'm just seeing your chat come up there. That also gave some life back because the effluent stopped. And I think also they must have had some laws in place, pollution laws in after that, which was based, the memories are the 1970s memories. But having said that, there's still an underlying sense of death because there's forever chemicals now leached into the soil, the subsoil, the air, the rain, and we don't know how long that's going to get rid of. There are people living along there now. We don't know how long, what's going to happen to them with their health and so on. It's going to take a few generations for us to figure that out. Yeah, with the type of pollution that we have to, with being industrial, especially in the south, that we have to go through. So
I find that these poems, the focus is almost an ecological lament, and you get a clear picture of that in the video you've just shown as well. I've never been to Trinidad, and obviously I'm from Jamaica, and I can see a stark difference between the landscape that you've just shown and the landscape in Jamaica. It's sort of a vivid green, whereas Jamaica is really green, whereas what I've just seen there is very grey. I don't know if it's the video, if the colorscape you've used to give that feeling of impending doom or
it's deliberately washed out, I think, some of the
yeah,
colors. But that particular area, as I said, was Barrackpore, which is another, at the time, rural town. It's a little bit more urbanized now. But it's pretending to be Marabella in the 70s. Now, both landscapes, and they resemble, I think they resemble, at least in my memory, how it was. Marabella is more built up now.
yeah,
Barrackpore is, in large parts, some of it rural. It used to be rice growing, but still there's a lot of farmers around there. And used to be cane fields also, which that's another story about the death of the cane industry. But the grain of the land and the topography is quite similar to Mamba. They're both flat, they're both floodplains. Guaracara, Marabella, when you're talking about Jamaica and Trinidad, the thing that we have, yes, we have mountains, especially the northern range. So we have floodplains, which would tend to be rivers. Caroni is our largest one. And then from that could rise the mountains. So we have three ranges going parallel to each other. We have the southern range, which is quite low, more or less hills. The central range, which is more topography of rolling slopes, but it is the mountains. And then we have the northern range, because Trinidad and the Caribbean, as you know, tends to be the Andes that has just gone underwater. So we're the tops of the mountains, at least most of it, the north part of Trinidad especially. What we don't have is the scale, of the mountains of Jamaica, which is the height of so, like Bajans always, it's so flat in Barbados. So each island has its own peculiarities. So Trinidad has quite a lot of delta sort of ecological also. So we have our little Everglades, which is the Caroni Sanctuary, the swamp where the scarlet ibis, a national bird, would come in. And now increasing numbers of exquisitely beautiful pink flamingos who have come in from Venezuela because they've realized it's safer to be here in that bird sanctuary, because it's illegal to kill any of the birds, than in Venezuela, where people are killing them to eat for food. Yeah.
My goodness. You do see that wherever you go, there is something to escape, some form of danger waiting around every corner, I would say. So I wanted to talk to you about I'm losing my eyesight. And I
Right.
noticed the title, it doesn't say I'm losing my sight. I noticed it says eyesight. So I'm thinking, why did you choose to title this poem with using the word eyesight? And also, could you tell us a bit why you've decided to use an ampersand at the end, the
Mm.
symbol? Why did you do that?
There was an ampersand and an ellipsis, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
Eyesight, that's an interesting thing.
Yeah, and
Picked
not,
up there because I think it's a particular thing. It's the organ. I mean, just today I woke up with problems with this right eye, as you could probably see,
yeah.
even though unusually I had a good 7 hours sleep because I'm having problems sleeping lately. Um, but sight and eyesight, there's a slight nuance, not really that slight. There is a difference with the sight being insight
Mhm.
and understanding also the physical world around us by just sensing them. If we close our eyes, we may know what is around us.
Yeah.
Now, I may be saying that simply because as an architect and I have a sort of developed three-dimensional sensory perception. But then I've heard, and I think it's true, that there are two types of people. There's one who thinks, there are those who think visually. They close their eyes and they could see an image, and that's how I work. I see that, I write about it. There are others who don't think like that, who cannot perceive of an image in their brain. They just think in
Mhm.
abstract ideas. That I cannot get my head around. I presume there are people who are in between, which I think maybe I am, but I think I'm primarily visual.
Yeah.
So I think one thing is, if there's things, if you ever lose one of your senses, which one will it be? I live with somebody who is hearing impaired,
Yeah.
which is probably why he's grumpy, because he can't hear that much, and your brain has to work that extra hard to sort of, concentrate on something while
Yeah.
you're hearing. But then for a long time, he had 20/20 vision.
Mhm.
So I don't know if it's one sense compensating for the other. But our sight also, to me, sight is more also sensing the feelings of somebody else, the appropriateness of somebody's actions. It's more than and eyesight is more the physical, tangible world that you see in front of you in all its form. Um,
Yeah. Yes, I was thinking something along those lines. Perhaps that the vision, the loss of vision, wasn't something that was static, but something unfolding.
yeah.
And whereas the other senses sort of compensate for the lack of vision,
Mm.
whereas the eyesight sort of pinpoints that to sensory loss through vision, whereas you do have an inner sort of hyper awareness that takes over.
Yeah. Also, the stereoscopic, if that's a correct word, vision of the two eyes, because one
Yeah,
eye, it's very difficult to tend to see, to sense depth, for
yeah,
example, which is what the different language of this way sunlight's hitting a wall, or whether you could see the grain or textures or depth of the wall or the corner, or if anything is coming out of it. The ampersand is also a conscious
yeah,
choice that I'm using a lot, if you noticed in my prose. It's more to do because obviously we'd never do it if we write prose, um,
yeah.
you know, but it's to do with the rhythm
Mm-hmm.
of the page and how it's read and how it's heard. So it's a quicker version of the form of the AND. So it's almost, for a poem on a page, to me, it's like musical notation. Again, another language.
Okay, yeah,
Again, another language
yeah.
that, you look and you hear the music. If once you read music, you hear that. I remember learning the piano as a child. I must have been about 5 or 6. And when you cheat and you write GA whatever underneath.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a point, a particular memory, mother in the kitchen, me practicing, it wasn't the skills. And you're looking up and down. It's almost like subtitles when you're looking in a K-drama. And suddenly I'm looking at the notes and I'm playing. It was an instant. And I think, hating it, really difficult, really difficult. And that point, it becomes the language rather
Yeah.
than a transitional tool of how to
Okay.
interpret something that's visual. Yeah.
Well, thank you for explaining why that ampersand is hanging off the end there. Thank you.
That and within poems too. Poems.
Yes.
See that, yes.
Okay. Right. So shall we talk about the Gulf of Paria? And I know it comes across as a elegiac poem, and it's cold in its fastness of language, and it led me to ask this question: when when did you first become aware of Trinidad and Tobago's history with slavery?
Ah.
Can you remember where you were? Or did
Um,
you learn it in
yeah,
school,
no.
or was it from family, friends?
Obviously growing up you hear it's referred to and so on. But in my generation, we weren't really taught that in schools. The history syllabus was up to Martin Luther and the popes and the kings, I think up in Form 3. Maybe A levels, if you're doing history, you're touching it. But for me, the true nature of it was vicarious. I was doing my dissertation in university on vernacular domestic architecture in Trinidad, doing my research up here, getting access to the Royal Society archives and those archives here, and seeing firsthand letters, sale documents, witnesses, friends of the planters who went down and then were appalled. It was really the Wild West.
Mm,
No laws. They knew they could get away with doing what they liked. So they just indulged. It's a story that I think if it ever comes out here, everybody will be traumatized. The descendants of planters themselves, much less, the enslaved. You'd have a magistrate going around the islands on
yeah,
his mule, but he'd be put up by the planters.
right.
And so nobody would get prosecuted for it. It's only when they were shamed, the depravity was shamed up here by somebody coming back and telling the papers.
Mm,
I mean, Mansfield Park, Jane Austen touched on that, actually, which is probably why it wasn't that popular when it was first published. Um, so people did know. People, they did know up here. It's just that I mean, we're seeing a version of that sort of blindness on depravities and obscenities happening now in the world with the genocide. And how
yeah,
long it's taking people, 50,000 people shouldn't have to die for us to know it's wrong, you know. But
yeah,
I I think it's that physically for me, learning, finding out about the way the plantations were set out. You had the buildings that the enslaved were put in, and it was locked from the windows, everything was locked from the outside once you went to sleep.
right.
You had
Yeah,
6 hours sleep, you got up and you had 6 hour shifts doing one task, being in the fields, stirring the sugar, being on the treadmills, and also the way the psychological torture also, it was to stop people feeling human. You
yeah,
had to make them think they were livestock so
yeah,
that there was no agency to know that you could actually rebel. And if you did, the punishment was, well, incredible.
yeah,
Um, but I came about learning about enslavement from the physical aspects and development of it, the layout of plantations, the way the buildings were done, um, uh, and also just during, for instance, the ships that were for the sugar thing would come over with bricks in the ballast to keep
yeah,
to keep them from thing. The bricks were then used to build the buildings. right? Mostly governmental buildings, because the poorer you are, you either have timber or adobe mud buildings. And the richer you are, you'd have your brick and masonry buildings. And then you'd put sugar in it and send it back up to Europe and here.
Yes. So you do talk
I'm
about
wrong. I'm wrong.
I know it's I asked that question because for me growing up in Jamaica, I can't actually remember the first time I heard about slavery in Jamaica, but it's something definitely that was taught in school, but not from the perspective of the
Yeah.
victim, but more of the sort of the revolutionary. We have seven heroes, national heroes in Jamaica, and we were taught how they rebelled and how they sort of they resisted enslavement, and which led to their freedom. And so we came to slavery from a different perspective,
Yeah.
not through fear of
You have the Maroons.
yes, with none into maroon, but through having this identity that we are resilient and we can resist and we can, overthrow our oppressors. So I was just curious to know from reading this collection where your sort of ideas of slavery and the first time you came across it came from. But yeah, well, thank you for sharing that with me.
I mean, the King Sugar sequence is talking about the whole thing. So after the so-called ending of slavery, because it wasn't a thing end, it was a sort of repeated of deceit, really, because you had a so-called apprenticeship where you still had to stay for 7 years on the estates.
Yes, okay, yeah.
But then after that, where would these planters, because they were given the biggest bailout ever in the history of the world, well enough beyond the bailouts that you get nowadays, that only recently was paid, the loan for that was sorted out with the British government. But how do you get people to go back and work? And so they got and that's where the indentureship comes in from India. And that's another lot of uncovering another set of drama, because a lot of people were deceived into thinking that it was light work, easy, you get lots of money, you get a free accommodation, and you get your passage back, which worked to a certain extent. But in comparative terms, we got to keep our names, supposedly. We got to keep our religion, supposedly, and the families were kept together. But that also has complications, just like enslavement has complications, where the enablers within the African continent itself needs to be addressed in addition. So that's the other thing. So that was also dealt with those poems. And then the ending of the sugar industry in Trinidad and the aftermath of that is also touched in that sequence.
Right. Shall we try and see if there are any questions in the box for you here? I can see one. It says, I think it's from Michael. It says, there are too many dangers if we remain ourselves. How do we become other? I think it's in reference to the tick box for identity.
That's from namesake. There are too many. So in her case, obviously she was a princess in a place that had a revolution that, you would have, you would be killed. That I'll just pick about Fawzia, her situation, but she fell in love with a young army colonel who was, I believe, part of the revolution, I think. And she just seemed to be happy to live a complete anonymous life. So her identity of being somebody who was royalty and just ended up being just Mrs. Housewife, quietly and happily, you know, so that's her situation. With the thing about how we become other is how do we become other because we are constantly reinventing ourselves, whether we like it or not. Strangely enough, when I was talking to my cropper friends this weekend, we call ourselves a round table now, there's intro in the thing there. We were talking about that, where we saw something where for people with trauma, they would have to visualize themselves, 6 people who are themselves at different stages of their life, and they ask the same question: what do you want? Where do you want to go? Have you done it? That sort of thing, I think the question was. And if we think back to what we are now, and who we were even 2 years ago, or even before 2020, we're different people. That's what I'm saying. And that's, in a way, Michael, I think, one answer to that. We are several people merged into one, and what we present is perhaps the person we want you to think we are.
We've got a second question for you, Fawzia. Can you
Claire.
talk from Claire Adam? Can you talk about the writing process from inspiration to final draft?
Right, which now, okay, I will speak about the poems, because when I try to write, for example, because Claire is a novelist, beautiful, beautiful language, I think you have to look about. When I try to write a short story, it doesn't end up being a short story, it just goes boing. It's like if you want to face something and your mind just pings off trying to do what it does. With my poems, I think I've realized that now, ever since the last 2 months where I spent in that residency with nothing to do except write, you intend to do something and your mind riffs off like a piece of jazz into something else. I try to, in answer to Claire's question, I write based on what I could see in my mind's eye, and it's usually a very clear vision. I tend to write observational, without judgment, without abstracts, and then find that I try to keep the language as simple as possible. And then we find that there's, not consciously, but afterwards when you read it or somebody else reads it and says, oh, look, I thought this, you find different layers. And when that happens, I think I feel success as a poet, because if somebody gets something, if it provokes some personal response to a reader that you had no intention and it sometimes has nothing to do with you, I think that's a good thing. I feel, yeah, something's working, because we're not going to be here forever, but the poems will be.
Okay.
That's all. Like, remember what you said, make your dad proud.
Yes, well, yeah, I did say that. That's insightful. Also, one final question before we wrap up. I just wanted to ask, when you're not busy designing buildings or poetry collections, how do you keep yourself grounded?
How do I keep myself grounded?
Yeah.
Well, at the moment, I'm trying to brush up on my Japanese lessons, because I'll be returning. I'd like to return for another few months at the end of the year. And I would like to say that I go for walks and I meditate. My friend Anne-Marie is there who guides me through that, but that's not true. I am actually addicted to Chinese short dramas.
Okay. We all something.
Not Netflix, you know, yes. And actually, yeah, my excuse is that's helping with the immersion of language learning, although it's not the language that I'm meant to be learning, but I am picking up this. So no, it's and the excuse for that is their storytelling is incredible. Not the long 70+ episodes, whatever, it's the ones, it's good to see the way the young people coming out of training, out of the film schools, are using those things to sort of hone their skills.
Yes.
Excuse. Yes. So how do I keep grounded? really have no conscious answer to that except just exist day to day, and just come into work, but trying to keep yourself human and not livestock, which is where routine, and the intention that this is all, we are creative people. I think everybody that I've just checked the participants, and every single one, from writers to musicians to actors, Sylvester and Owen, you know, we have to honor the creative life that we have more so than anything else, because that what we create is what will persist as our legacy beyond
Yes.
our lives. And so we have a duty to be not just excellent, but to big every step to bring up each other's gains, for want of a better way of putting it, you know, to boost each other and to raise our standards. So I think that's
So on that note of creativity, are we to expect a new collection sooner than 10 years?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Things are coming from the Japanese experience. Yes, and the fact that I've made lifelong friends there, not in the usual what we think here Japan consists of in the urban environment. It was remote, it was rural, it was with farmers, it was sitting with them, being invited by them to sit with them and see their food, which is quite hearty, not the exquisite little perfection that we're accustomed to. And fisher folk. It was coastal. So and the landscape also was very Trinidad. I've shown the film that I made. There's a film poem I made of that too, called Kishikan, which actually is a far more accurate word describing déjà vu, because we don't have that word in English, do we?
Yeah.
So it was very much Trinidad.
Is there somewhere we can watch that other film, Fawzia?
Yeah, it's on my film and another. You mean now?
Just in general, we could put the link in the chat for everybody.
Yeah.
No, well, yeah, I could give it to you and then you could
I can share it with everyone. Yes, that would be really nice.
People, but it's not finished yet because I'd like to put some Japanese subtitles on it. And I sort of have to learn motion graphics for that. So later in the year, it's meant to be submitted to a. It was done for an exhibition as a result of the in Japan, which was shown, but I'd like to fine tune it a bit more. And then
we can look forward to that.
Yeah, it's meant to be submitted to a independent film thing, so festival. So.
Well, thank you, Fawzia, for sharing your poetry with us, and we do look forward to the new collection, hopefully soon.
I'd like it to be bilingual actually, so I'm working on that with a translator. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both so much. It's been really wonderful.